Superman Returns was released in 2006, and man was I excited for this one. I've been waiting for a brand new Superman movie since Superman 4, which was released in 1987. It felt like it had been so long in between movies, and it had, but we did get other Superman content in between. We had Superboy, the live action TV show, we had Superman the animated series, we had Lois and Clark, and we also had Smallville. And of course we almost got Superman Lives, which would have been a Tim Burton movie starring Nicolas Cage, and I'm kind of glad that that didn't actually come out. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see what kind of film it could have been. But I weren't a fan of the concept art, and I weren't a massive fan of the suit that Nicolas Cage was wearing, as they kind of went down this moulded bodysuit like the Batman movies had with Keaton, which worked for that character, but for Superman, I think it has got to be all him, not a muscle suit. But at the same time, and I'm going to contradict myself here, I'd give my right arm to see that movie and see what kind of movie it would have been. He may have surprised me. But in 2006, I was so hungry for a Superman movie. I wanted to see what Hollywood could bring us with these updated special effects that we had nowadays that we simply didn't have way back in 1987. Especially after watching The Matrix 3, after seeing Neo and Agent Smith have a mid-air battle over the city. I remember seeing that for the very first time and thinking to myself, now the time is right. Give us a Superman movie. And 3 years later, unfortunately, we got Superman Returns. However, saying that, I did actually go and see this movie in the theatre more than once. It was a thrill to see Superman back on the big screen, even if the story was a little bit lackluster, if not brave. And there was something just a little bit off about the movie. It had so much going against it, and it's no wonder that it didn't actually get a sequel. First of all, I think the first mistake was making it a direct sequel to Richard Donner's Superman 2. And casting Brandon Routh as Superman, which, don't get me wrong, he was a good Superman. I actually like him in that role, but he was only picked because he resembled Christopher Reeve. I think they were leaning too much into this continuation of the Richard Donner Superman when they should have really just made it their own thing. And like I said, his portrayal of Superman is pretty good in most scenes, but sometimes he comes across as a little bit bland. But on the whole, I thought his portrayal of Superman was pretty good, but like I said before, he was playing Chris Reeve's version of Superman, which kind of hindered his performance, I think, a little bit, because we never saw Brandon Routh's version of Superman. We never saw what he could bring to the table. But years later, we did get Crisis on Infinite Earths, and we did see Brandon Routh return to the role in an alternate universe version of Superman, and he could finally portray his own version of the character for all of us to see. And that is where I believe this movie truly fails. They didn't make it its own entity. They even used the same Superman theme, the John Williams score from the previous 4 films, which I must admit there is nothing in this world that lifts my spirits more than hearing that theme tune. But I think for this movie they could have possibly benefited by giving us a different sound. Maybe even keeping the John Williams theme, but changing it up a little bit, like James Gunn has just done in the new trailer for his Superman movie. That was the John Williams score, but it was altered slightly, and it fit. What I was really hoping for from this movie was to see a fresh take on Superman with some epic fight scenes, some massive battles against some massive supervillains from the comic books, something we hadn't seen before. Really put him up against something that would give us a visual spectacle. Unfortunately, in this movie, Superman doesn't even throw one punch. As the movie starts, we get some text explaining to us that Superman has been off Earth for 5 years as he's been out in space looking for Krypton, but all he finds is the remains of his destroyed planet. And in the movie, we don't get to see Superman's trip to Krypton. We get this little bit of text at the beginning of the film telling us where he's been, but we don't see it, even though those scenes were actually filmed, and you can find them on the special features, you can find them here on YouTube. They were filmed, so why they didn't use them is beyond me, because it would have been a great way to set up a little bit more of the story and explain more about where he's been, rather than just having a little bit of text on the screen. And they were actually pretty impressive scenes as well. And the deleted scene was pretty good. We actually see Superman flying through the wreckage of his planet, and then he starts to get slowly poisoned by the kryptonite in the planet, and he barely makes it out of there alive, and it's quite an exciting scene. And then when he reaches Earth and he crash lands back on the Kent farm, we see that he is weakened, but in the theatrical cut we don't know why he's weakened. But in the deleted scene, it explains everything. It explains why he is weakened. It's because he flew through the planet, which is made of kryptonite. But if you ask me, this whole plot point was kind of dumb. Why would Superman go out into space looking for the planet Krypton? Because he already knows it's been destroyed. Jor-El has already told him when he used the crystals in the previous films. Let's not forget, this is a continuation of the Donner Cut. He's already got all this information. There's no need for him to go into space. The only reason They sent him up into space is because they needed that 5-year period where Superman wasn't around to further the story of this movie, which in my opinion was quite ballsy to say the least. When Superman actually returns to Earth, he finds out that Lois Lane has actually moved on with her life and she's married Richard White, who is played by James Marsden, who actually turned down X-Men 3 for this movie. I never really understood why he would choose to play a character who was in this weird kind of love triangle instead of playing a cool superhero like Cyclops, who never really got the time to shine in the X-Men movies, and X-Men 3 could have been the chance for him. But, you know, probably not. It was a bad film as well. The biggest storyline in this movie is that Richard and Lois have a child, which is actually Superman's child. And I remember being quite conflicted at the time. I weren't sure how I thought about this. And I think it was a brave move. It wasn't up until 2015 when Superman actually had a child with Lois in the comic books. So, in a way, the movie did it first. And also Lex Luthor is in this movie, played by Kevin Spacey. And he's no longer in prison because Superman wasn't around to give evidence, so they simply just let him go free. Which is, again, totally dumb. Lex Luthor totally destroyed the San Andreas fault line, even though Superman did rebuild it. And he did aid 3 Kryptonians in taking over the world, even though Superman stopped them. But still, he did try to take over the world with these aliens from another planet. I don't believe that he would have been freed from prison for that. Well, maybe. It's not a perfect world, but I just don't see that happening, and I think it was another dumb plot point. They should have just made this movie from scratch. They should have made it their own thing with a good story, not one that was just pieced together here and there. And the best plan the greatest criminal mind of our time can come up with is to simply swindle an old lady out of her fortune. I mean, really? That's the best an evil genius can come up with? Spend 5 years with an old woman, make her believe that you love her, and then just wait for her to die and take her fortune. That's the best you can do with such a great character? Come on. And it's not long before Luthor is up to his old tricks and he's using his newfound fortune to set in motion his evil plan, which is land. Once again, Lex Luthor is simply after land, he's after real estate again, which I think is one of the most dumbest supervillain master plans of all time, and I weren't a fan of it in the original movies, and I'm most definitely not a fan of it in this one. They seem to be just recycling all plot points and putting them into this movie. I'm just glad that they didn't make Superman turn back time by flying around the world in this one. And he tries to accomplish this by stealing a crystal from Superman's fortress and throwing it into the sea, and it creates this massive Kryptonian landmass, which is just... it's just dumb. It's just a dumb idea. But before he does this, he takes a little bit of crystal, puts it in a little bit of water, which is built around this model set of Metropolis, and it shows you the destruction that it would actually cause. Now, by dropping this little bit of crystal in the water, it creates a massive EMP, which sends shockwaves through Metropolis, knocking out all the power, including an aeroplane, which is actually giving a rocket ship a boost into space. And quite conveniently, Lois Lane is on board this plane. This EMP causes problems as the shuttle fails to unlock itself from the aircraft, the thrusters go off, and both the shuttle and the plane start heading towards space. But luckily, Superman arrives and sends the shuttle off into space as the aeroplane plummets back down to Earth. And this is probably the most exciting scene in the entire movie. I absolutely adore this scene. I think it is fantastic as we see Superman trying to stop this plane from crashing, and he actually struggles with it, as he probably would if it was real life, if Superman did exist. It wouldn't be as easy as just catching it. In this movie, he's going after it, he's grabbing the wing breaks off, he's trying to grab other parts of the plane, it's rippling and breaking. It's a really interesting scene. If it was a Chris Reeves movie, he would have probably just flown down and just caught it, and that would have been that. But this movie really does lean into the physics of the aeroplane crashing, the aeroplane plummeting to the earth and Superman trying to stop it, and it was a really interesting scene, and this is, in my opinion, the best we got from this movie. And I must admit, in this movie, you really do believe that a man can fly, a tagline taken from the old Superman movies, I must admit, but it works really well for this. In 2006, we'd never really seen a full CGI animated Superman model, and they pulled it off flawlessly. It's everything I could have ever wanted. And as Superman brings the plane down safely, but not easily, he does board the plane and say some iconic lines.
Hope this experience hasn't put any of you off flying. Statistically speaking, it's still the safest way to travel.
Well, I certainly hope this little incident hasn't put you off flying, miss. Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
Of course, that was a callback to the original movie where Superman catches Lois from the falling helicopter and then delivers those lines. It was a cool callback and I really did appreciate it. But when you look a little bit deeper, that's what this movie kind of is. It's just kind of retreading the same beats as the first two movies. Lois Lane falls from a helicopter. In Superman Returns, she's falling in a plane. In the original movie, Lex Luthor is after real estate. In this movie, Lex Luthor is after real estate. And in the first movie, where Luthor destroys the San Andreas fault line, he causes a massive earthquake. In this movie, he creates a massive Kryptonian landmass, which causes an earthquake. In Donner's movie, Superman takes Lois on a romantic flight. In Singer's movie, Superman takes Lois on a romantic flight. This movie just seems to be a massive homage to the original Superman films. And like I keep saying, that's one of the reasons I just don't think it worked. We already had a great film. Give us a different one. Give us a better one. It seems to be more or less the same movie with slightly different changes here and there. And I wasn't really sold on the casting of this movie either. Kate Bosworth as Lois Lane wasn't riveting. It was a little bit lackluster to say the least. Her performance, if best, is just fine. And I found Kevin Spacey's portrayal of Lex Luthor a little bit underwhelming as well. Not great. There were little bits here and there where he was quite menacing, but on the whole I just found him laughable. WRONG! And then we have Parker Posey's character of Kitty, who is basically playing Miss Teschmacher from the first movie. And I have heard other people suggest that she would have been a better Lois Lane. And yeah, I must admit, I think that's a great idea. And I think they really missed an opportunity there to cast her as Lois Lane. She would have been a great Lois Lane. There are some scenes in the movie where she's got her hair up and she looked kind of like she's from the 1950s. And it reminded me of the 1950s version of Lois that would have been in the comic books. And that would have been in the TV serials at the time. And the cartoon that was around, the Max Fleischer cartoon, I think she would have been a perfect Lois Lane. Just perfect. I think she would have brought a feistiness to the role, which was most needed, in my opinion. And Sam Huntington played Jimmy Olsen perfectly. The casting of this character was perfect. The portrayal of this character was perfect. He was Jimmy Olsen in every single way, and he was a lot better than the Jimmy Olsen we got in the Zack Snyder movie, which, in my opinion, wasn't Jimmy Olsen at all, and they killed him off straight away. It was just a dumb idea. I don't know why they did that in that movie, but in this one, he's perfect as Jimmy Olsen. He embodies everything about that character. And then we have Franklin Jello, who plays Perry White, who once again, in my opinion, was perfectly cast for this role. He plays Perry White so well, and he even spouts out the great line, "Great Caesar's Ghost," which Perry White was always saying in the old Superman comic books, so it was great to get that line into this movie.
Great Caesar's Ghost.
And then we have Brandon Routh, who played Superman, and like I said before, I think he was a pretty good Superman. Unfortunately, he was playing Chris Reeve's version of Superman, but he did bring a quality to the character that I think was missing from Henry Cavill's Superman, who I think is probably one of the best after Reeves. But if this quality that Brandon Routh and Chris Reeves had brought to the role was included with Henry Cavill, I think Henry Cavill's Superman could have been perfect in my eyes. Brandon Routh brought this quality, so I've got to give him points on that. But I must admit, even though Brandon Routh's portrayal of Superman was wholesome in most scenes, there were some scenes in this movie where I just thought the character came across as creepy and stalkerish. And these scenes involve Superman spying on Lois and her new family by using his X-ray vision and looking through the walls of their family home. It just seemed wrong. This made him come across as kind of an untrustworthy kind of character, which is way out of character for Superman, and it just kind of felt a little bit icky. But other than that, I thought Routh's portrayal of Superman was fine. You know what, he actually embodied the spirit of Superman quite well. When Lex Luthor threw the crystal in the sea and the great Kryptonian landmass came up and it caused a massive earthquake back on Metropolis, Superman was there saving people. He was looking out for people. And that is what that character's all about. He puts the people of Metropolis first. We see him flying through the city, saving multiple people, which is also a little bit like the Richard Donner version of Superman, but that is, in my opinion, the perfect version of Superman. And we also see him catch the Daily Planet globe, which is such a cool visual. That scene, awesome. And whilst all this is happening, Lois and Richard are actually trapped on a ship out at sea, which is split in two, and it's actually sinking. And you feel a real tension in this scene. You feel like they're actually going to drown. Even though you know Superman is going to come and save the day, I do really like this scene and I think it is quite effective. And when Superman actually does make an appearance and you see his boots hit that window and he pulls the ship up out of the water, it's quite exciting and quite thrilling. So we were seeing all the things that Superman should be doing. We were seeing Superman actually save people, which was a good element of this movie. And there's also a scene near the end of the movie where Superman lands on this giant Kryptonian landmass, and he doesn't know that this landmass has been created with kryptonite as well. So he goes to confront Luthor, and then he quickly learns that his powers are depleted, and Luthor and his henchmen actually beat the hell out of him, and it's actually a really powerful scene, and it really does make you sad. It always gets me every time I watch it. And then Lex Luthor actually stabs him with like a blade of kryptonite, and it is quite brutal, and you can hear Superman actually struggling to breathe as he tumbles off the landmass into the sea. But this scene where he's getting beaten, you really do feel for him, and if I can say one thing, that's down to Routh's portrayal of Superman. He's made him a likeable character in this movie. He's gentle, he's kind, he's lovable, and that's all down to Brandon Routh's portrayal of Superman. And if it weren't for that, I don't believe that this scene would have worked, and it works so well. Now, after Superman has fallen into the sea and he's got this shard of kryptonite in him and he's drowning, Lois Lane actually spots him as they're flying past in the plane. She pulls him in the plane, she pulls the kryptonite shard out of him, and then he flies up into the clouds. He regenerates his powers by flying in front of the sun, and then he goes straight back down underneath the island and starts to lift it up out of the sea. Now, a minute ago when he landed on this island, he was weakened straight away. Totally weakened. He was like a human being. But this time, he's lifting the actual island into space. Now, you could argue that he did actually go in front of the sun. He powered up, he come straight back down, he went underneath the landmass and lifted up actual Earth instead of kryptonite. You could make that argument. But then when the kryptonite starts poking its way out of the Earth, and it's right next to him, and he still manages to take this thing all the way up into space, I just found it a little bit far-fetched. It would have weakened him straight away. A little rock around his neck in the other movie weakened him straight away. It's like they just changed the rules to give us the ending of the movie. I just hated that part. There's no way Superman could have lifted that island that was made out of kryptonite. But he did, and he's obviously weakened by this. He comes crashing back down to Earth, hits the ground and falls into a coma. Whilst he's in this coma in hospital, Lois tells him that the boy is actually his. It's his son. Next scene, we see him standing inside the little boy's bedroom, staring at him while he's asleep. Once again, kind of creepy. And then as the movie ends, we see Superman fly off into space, fly around the planet, look at the camera, and give us that cheeky smile that Chris Reeves always liked to do at the end of his movies. Once again, they even ended it the same way. Once again, it's a direct sequel to the Richard Donner movies, so yeah. And that is where I think the main problem with this movie is. Riding off the coattails of a movie that was over 30 years old. It should never ever have been a continuation of those movies. It should have been its own identity. It should have been its own movie, and we should have got a really good Superman story out of it. In my opinion, the Richard Donner movies are not movies that need sequels. They exist in their own period of time. This was the 2000s. We should have got something completely new. But like I said, there were some elements of this movie that I actually did enjoy, and upon rewatching it, I actually had a good time. I think there were some plot points to this movie, some storylines to this movie that were quite ballsy and brave, but ultimately I don't think they worked. But it would have been nice to see Brandon Routh return in a sequel to this movie, maybe give us some more threatening villains. It would have been great to see Brainiac, which I think they actually had planned, but it never saw the light of day, which is a shame. But I think if we'd have got a number 2, maybe we would have got Superman's version of X-Men 2 by Bryan Singer, but alas, it didn't happen.